That dress is brave, Elena. That was the very first thing Margaret said to me as I walked into her dining room that evening. No hello. No, how's your week been? Just that. And she didn't even look at me, only at the rim of her wineglass, as though the reflection there was more interesting than my actual face. I stood at the doorway for a second too long, pretending to adjust my bracelet, giving myself time to swallow the remark. Or maybe just swallow the disappointment. After so many years, you'd think I'd be used to it. But does anyone really get used to someone endlessly finding fault with them? James placed his hand on my back, guiding me toward the table. "Mum's in one of her moods," he whispered. "Don't take it to heart." But wasn't she always in one of her moods? And why were those moods only aimed at me? We took our seats, Margaret at the head, James beside her, and me opposite him. The arrangement never changed. Like most things in the Whitmore household, it had been decided long before I entered the picture. The table was set beautifully, as always. Silver cutlery, polished glasses, candles placed exactly the same distance apart. Margaret's touch was everywhere. It made me wonder, had she always been this precise, or did the need for control arrive later in her life? Dinner started with small talk. Margaret asked about James's work, giving him her full attention. Her eyes softened when he spoke, the way a mother's should. But whenever I added something, her expression cooled, almost politely. Barely noticeable unless you'd experienced it for years. I took a sip of water and tried to join the conversation. "I visited the gallery in Guildford today," I said lightly. "They've brought in a new collection." "Oh," Margaret interjected, "that place is quite contemporary for my taste." A gentle dismissal, but a dismissal all the same. Did she realize she did that? Or was it instinctive for her? James cleared his throat. "Mum, Elena's been helping them organize." "Yes, lovely," she said, already lifting her fork. "Shall we begin?" I let the rest of the sentence die. Moments like this used to surprise me. Now they were simply part of the routine. People imagine difficult mothers-in-law as loud, intrusive, argumentative. Margaret was none of those things. She spoke softly, moved gracefully, and rarely raised her voice. But somehow, her gentleness carried an undertone that unsettled me more than any shouting could. Was it the wording? The pauses? Or the constant feeling that I was being measured against a standard I never agreed to? While we ate, she commented on everything. How I cut my food, whether I drank too quickly, how often I checked my phone, even when I hadn't. All of it wrapped in the language of concern. "Just making sure you're not overwhelmed, dear," she'd say. But why was I the only one being monitored? At one point, Margaret asked James whether he'd managed to speak to the contractor about the bathroom refurbishment. She leaned forward, listening closely to every detail he provided. When he finished, she gave him a look of utter approval. Warm, proud, familiar. Then she turned to me. "Elena, have you thought any further about changing your hair? The color you chose last time washed you out terribly." It was said kindly. It was always said kindly. James stepped in. "Mum, it looked fine." "I'm simply offering guidance," Margaret said, folding her hands neatly. "A family must present itself well." A family, the implication was clear. Some of us needed more adjusting than others. I glanced at James. Was he ever going to stop smoothing things over? Or had his entire life trained him to excuse, soften, and tolerate? After dinner, James helped clear the dishes. Though Margaret insisted she didn't need help, she always insisted. But she also always accepted when it came from him, not from me. I stayed in the hallway, giving them space and giving myself a moment to breathe. The house was quiet except for the clink of plates and the low murmur of their voices. The Whitmore estate had that echoing sort of silence. Old walls, high ceilings, too many rooms for 3 people. Then, just as I was about to step into the kitchen, I heard something. A whisper. I almost thought I'd imagined it. Margaret's voice. Soft, deliberate. She can never know. My whole body stilled. Not, she shouldn't know. Not, I hope she never finds out. But she can never know. I couldn't hear James's reply. Just the faint scrape of a chair and the rustle of a tea towel. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. She can never know. No. What? What was it they thought I wasn't meant to learn? Why did it sound rehearsed, like a phrase they'd shared before? And how long had there been something in this family that didn't include me? On the drive home, James hummed along to the radio, completely relaxed. I watched him, wondering how someone could look so calm when there were clearly parts of his life he hadn't shown me. I turned to the window, watching the Surrey fields stretch out in the night. Everything felt distant, quiet, unsettled. What was it Margaret was hiding? Why was James involved? And what exactly was I not supposed to know? The question followed me all the way home and settled somewhere deep inside me. Know what? James! I heard her! That was the first thing I said the next morning as we stood in our small kitchen in Guildford. The kettle had just clicked off, steam rising between us like a quiet barrier. I hadn't slept, not properly. Every time I closed my eyes, Margaret's whisper stirred the stillness in my mind. She can never know. But know what? James looked up from his mug, concern flickering briefly before settling into his usual calm expression. What exactly did you hear, love? I held the edge of the counter. Your mum. Last night, she said, she can never know. A pause. And she meant me. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he needed a moment to think. Elena, you might have caught the tail end of something unrelated. Unrelated. Everything always had another explanation. Or so he said. His dismissal stayed with me long after he left for work. I tried to busy myself, laundry, dishes, wiping the counters, but my mind drifted to all the moments that had brought me here. The slow erosion of confidence, the careful nudges that always moved me back into the shadows of this family. The wedding came to mind first. Margaret had smiled gently when she offered her suggestions, but somehow her suggestions always turned into decisions. Flowers, seating charts, the venue, even my bouquet. She had said she only wanted the day to be perfect. Perfect according to whom? And then there were the conversations I'd had privately with her. Moments when I'd tried, genuinely, to bond with her, to find common ground. I told her once that I was struggling at work, feeling overlooked, uncertain. It felt safe to tell her. Until I heard James mention it weeks later with surprising detail. You told my mum all that? I'd asked him, startled. He had blinked at me. She brought it up. I thought you must have told her. Except I hadn't. And even though Margaret pretended she'd got things mixed up, I knew she hadn't. Why did she do that? Why share what wasn't hers to share? Then I remembered the small but unmistakable moments, the family traditions from Christmas to Easter lunches, to Sunday visits full of warmth. All of them well-kept rituals, ones I was gently guided away from. Don't worry about the cooking, Elena, Margaret would say. We have our own way. Or, you don't need to join us this morning. You'll be bored. But boredom wasn't the real reason. I wasn't being excluded because I didn't understand their traditions. I was being excluded because she didn't want me woven into them. The loneliness of that settled in my chest even now, years later. What had I walked into when I married into the Whitmores? Was I joining a family or stepping into someone else's unspoken history? Later that night, when James returned home, we sat on the sofa. I waited for a moment when the room felt still enough for honesty. He was scrolling through emails. I was pretending to read. Finally, I couldn't hold it back. James, I said quietly, do you actually see what she's doing to me? He lowered his phone, a crease forming between his brows. What do you mean? All of it, I whispered. She questions everything I do. She rewrites our decisions. She shares things I've told her in private. She treats me like I'm temporary. And you keep saying she's just tired or stressed or whatever else. But do you see it? He rubbed his temples slowly, eyes drifting away from mine. Love. Mum's just complicated. Complicated. That word again. It felt like a padlock on every door I tried to open. But doesn't it matter that she hurts me? I asked softly. He sighed. She doesn't mean to, honestly. She's just protective. Protective of whom? Him? Herself? Or someone else entirely? I didn't push further. Sometimes silence speaks louder than arguments. A few days later, I found myself sitting alone in a small cafe in Farnham. I'd gone there to clear my head, to write a list of things I could control and things I couldn't. A useless exercise, really. But I tried. The cafe was warm, filled with the sound of cups tapping saucers and low chatter. People around me looked relaxed. No one else seemed to be carrying invisible questions in their chest. I was stirring my tea when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, half expecting a server. Instead, an elderly woman stood behind me, gray hair pinned neatly back, a coat buttoned up to her chin. Her eyes studied me with an intensity I wasn't used to. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her voice slightly shaky yet clear. "You're Margaret's daughter-in-law, aren't you?" My heart paused. "Yes," I said carefully. "I am." The woman smiled faintly. "I thought so. You look just like her." I felt the words hit me in a way I couldn't explain. Like her? Look like her? There was nothing about our appearances that matched. Not our eyes, not our hair, not our features, not even the way we carried ourselves. Why would she say that? I opened my mouth to ask, but the woman nodded once, turned, and walked out of the cafe. No explanation, no hesitation, as if her purpose had been simply to tell me that one sentence and nothing more. I stared after her, my breath caught somewhere between confusion and something deeper, something I didn't yet have the language for. Why would a stranger say that? And how did she know Margaret well enough to recognize me? The door closed behind the woman, and suddenly the cafe felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the air itself was waiting for me to understand something. But I didn't. Not yet. All I knew was this. If I looked like Margaret, then what did that woman see? "James, pass me that box." "No, the one with the copper latch," I said, brushing insulation dust off my sleeves as I knelt on the creaking attic boards. He groaned softly as he shifted another trunk aside. "Your mother would have a field day if she saw the state of this place," he muttered, half laughing, half out of breath. I didn't respond. After everything the cafe woman had said the day before, her words had kept circling my mind like a loose thread I couldn't stop pulling. You look just like her, like Margaret. Why did that bother me so much? And why did it feel like the beginning of something I wasn't prepared to unravel? I tugged the copper-latched box toward me. It was surprisingly light, the kind of box someone holds onto out of obligation rather than importance. Still, something about the faded edges and odd pattern, gold swirls pressed into peeling leather, made my stomach tighten. "James," I called, "this one belongs to your mum." He squinted over. "Are you sure? She keeps most of her things downstairs." "Yes." I tapped the lid. "Her initials are on it. M.W." He frowned, then shrugged. "Probably old junk." But there was a hesitation in his voice, the smallest waver. Had he noticed that too? I opened the box. The hinges let out a tired sigh. The first thing I saw was a stack of photographs, battered, curled, edges cracked, as though someone had flicked through them 1,000 times, and never gently. My heart beat loud in my ears. On top lay a photograph of a younger Margaret. Not much younger, maybe my age now, but softer around the eyes. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't look as guarded as she does in every picture on the walls downstairs. She was holding a baby whose head rested on her shoulder, one tiny arm draped over her blouse. I leaned closer. A faint birthmark, barely the size of a fingertip, sat just above the child's collarbone. I swallowed hard. The same place as mine. The same shape. "James," I whispered. "Come here." He climbed over a beam, brushing dust from his hair. "What is it?" I held up the picture. He blinked. "Well, that's Mum." "Yes? And the baby?" My voice felt smaller than it should have. He shook his head slowly. "I don't recognize them." I studied his expression, waiting for even a flicker of recognition. Something. But there was nothing, only confusion. I reached back into the box, my hand brushing papers, ribbons, an old button. Another photograph surfaced. This time, Margaret was standing beside an unfamiliar man. Broad-shouldered, dark hair, a tired sort of smile. He had an arm around her, protective but strained. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. James took the photo, his brow furrowing. "No, Mum never mentioned any man before Dad. Not once." The idea that Margaret had entire chapters of her life hidden away wasn't a surprise, yet seeing the physical evidence made something shift inside me. Like a door had been cracked open, letting in a draft I didn't know existed. Beneath the photos, tucked into a small envelope, was a torn piece of paper. Thick, official, faded. I slid it out carefully. A birth certificate. Or rather, half of one. The ink was smudged, but I could make out female, born Surrey. Mother, Margaret. The rest was torn clean through the name. My breath hitched. Was I meant to see this? Why hide it? Why keep only half? "Elena," James said gently, "don't jump to conclusions." I looked at him. Really looked. "How many more things has she kept from us?" I asked quietly. "From you?" He didn't answer. My fingers brushed something harder at the bottom of the box. A sealed envelope, cream-colored. The edges crisp despite its age. My name wasn't on it. But Margaret's was. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, Whitmore Estate, Surrey. And beneath it, written in faded blue ink. From Catherine Hale, I felt the weight of the attic change, the air heavier, pressing on my chest. Catherine Hale, my biological mother. I stared at the name, the letters blurring slightly as my heart hammered louder than before. "Elena?" James's voice softened. "What is it?" I held up the envelope like it was something fragile, something that might break open and spill answers everywhere. "I think," I said, breath unsteady, "I've just found a letter addressed to your mum, from the woman who gave birth to me." The attic felt suddenly colder. Outside, a branch scraped the window like a warning. James stared at the envelope, speechless. And all I could think was, why did Margaret have a letter from my mother? "Catherine, I need you to look at me." My voice came out shaken, nothing like how I'd rehearsed it during the entire drive to my childhood home in Guildford. The envelope from Margaret's attic lay between us on the kitchen table, untouched since I'd placed it there. My mother, the only mother I had ever known, stood frozen by the kettle, one hand holding the counter as if she needed the support. "Elena," she murmured, "why didn't you call first?" "Because you would have found a way to put this conversation off." I gestured to the envelope. "I found this in Margaret's things. Why would she have a letter from you? And why does it feel like I'm the last person who should be seeing it?" Her shoulders curled inward. It frightened me, seeing her so small. This was the woman who taught me how to plait my hair, who held me during every childhood nightmare, who always told me I was chosen, wanted. I'd never seen fear on her face like this. I waited, the ticking of the kitchen clock marking each second she didn't speak. Finally, she turned, her eyes already glistening. "Elena," she whispered, I was hoping this day wouldn't come. Those words sank into me like cold water. What day? I asked. My throat tightened. The day I find out who I really am? Her breath trembled. She came to sit opposite me, her hand hovering over mine, unsure whether she still had the right to reach for it. You are my daughter, she said. Nothing changes that. That isn't what I asked you. For a moment, she pressed her lips together, almost as though steadying herself for a confession she'd buried decades ago. Then she spoke. Margaret and we were friends once. The room felt suddenly smaller. I blinked. You knew her? Before I married James? She nodded. Long before. We met when we were barely out of university. She was bold, charming, the sort of woman everyone listened to even when she whispered. For a while, she was the closest friend I had. I tried to picture a younger Margaret, one who laughed with my mother, one who shared secrets instead of hiding them behind raised eyebrows and cutting remarks. But something happened, I said. Her gaze faltered. Margaret had a baby girl, she continued quietly. A beautiful child. I used to visit them, hold her. I even helped with her christening outfit. I felt a pull in my chest. Tight, strange, almost familiar. What happened to the baby? I asked. She inhaled shakily. There was an incident. Something traumatic. I won't describe it. But after that, the little girl was taken into care. Margaret wasn't allowed to raise her. I felt the room tilt just slightly. Margaret, losing a child. Did James know any of this? And you? I asked. Where do I fit into this? Catherine folded her hands together, as if bracing herself. A few years later, she said softly, I adopted a baby girl. You! The ticking of the clock grew louder, as if my ears had emptied of everything else. You adopted me, I repeated. Yes. Did Margaret know? Catherine's eyes filled. She found out, somehow. I don't know who told her or how she traced it back to me, but she became adamant. She kept insisting that the baby I'd adopted, that you, had to be connected to her somehow, as if the world revolved around her grief. I gripped the edge of the table. And is that why you never told me? Because of her? She nodded, her breath catching. I was terrified she might try to reclaim you, or twist something, or drag you into whatever life she'd left behind. I wanted you safe. I wanted you away from her. I swallowed hard, the pieces falling together in ways that made my skin prickle. Mum, the word wavered. Am I Margaret's daughter? Catherine's face crumpled. She reached for my hands, and this time I didn't pull away. No, she whispered. You aren't hers, but you are tied to her in ways I hoped you'd never discover. Something fluttered in my chest. Fear, disbelief, confusion. Tied how? Why me? What does that mean? I asked. What are you not saying? She looked down, wiping a tear with her sleeve, her hands trembling as if the truth itself might burn her. Elena, she whispered, some things are better left buried. My heart hammered. Buried? Why? What was she protecting me from now? Before I could ask again, she stood abruptly, turning away, her shoulders shaking. A conversation ending without closure, like a door slammed before the echo settles. And just like that, I realized she wasn't going to tell me. Not tonight. Not willingly. But the truth was no longer something I could ignore or tiptoe around. Whatever connected me to Margaret Whitmore, whatever lay beneath the years of strained smiles and quiet digs, I had stepped too far into it to turn back now. And Catherine's refusal only made one thing clear. Whatever is buried, it isn't finished with me yet. Before you continue listening, if you're enjoying the journey, don't forget to show me your support by subscribing. Your subscription means a lot. It helps keep these stories alive. And without you, there's no way I can continue sharing the twists, the turns, and the raw moments that speak to the heart. Please don't leave me hanging. Subscribe now, thank you. Margaret, look at me. That was the first thing I said when I stepped into her conservatory, drenched from the dash through the rain. The glass roof thundered above us, every drop sounding like an accusation. She sat in her wicker chair, with a blanket draped over her knees, her posture perfectly straight, too straight for someone who claimed not to be hiding anything. She didn't turn her head. Not at first. "Elena," she murmured, "you could have called." "No, you would have avoided this." Her fingers froze on the rim of her teacup. Avoided. A word she'd spent years perfecting. I stepped closer. "I know about Catherine. I know she knew you before I ever met James. I know something happened long before I came into this family." She inhaled, short and sharp, like someone trying to steady themselves before a blow. "And I know," I continued, "that whatever this is, it involves me." She closed her eyes, slowly, deliberately, as if bracing for the truth she'd run from for decades. "Elena," she said softly, "you shouldn't have dug this up." My heart thudded. Too late for warnings. Too late for soft diversions or half-truths. "I need the truth," I said. "All of it." At that, her shoulders slumped. The first crack. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit." I didn't. I stayed standing, watching her closely. She opened her eyes then, and for the first time since I'd known her, Margaret Whitmore looked tired. Not in the way age wears on a person, but in the way grief does. Slowly, relentlessly, until the weight of it becomes a part of their posture. "Elena," she began, "before anything else, you must understand that I failed someone long before I failed you." Rain hammered the glass above us. She continued, voice breaking at the edges. "I had a sister, Alice." The name hit me like a shift in the room's temperature. "She was younger," Margaret went on, staring somewhere past me, "and gentler. She trusted too easily. She loved too deeply. I tried to protect her, but she fell for a man who controlled her. Bit by bit, he isolated her. I begged her to leave him. She wouldn't." Her fingers shook slightly as she smoothed the blanket on her knee. "One day," Margaret whispered, "she vanished. Gone." Just like that. The rain seemed louder now, filling the silence she left between us. "We searched for her," she said, "for weeks, months. And then one morning, I received a call. She'd been found. She was in a very bad state, and she was pregnant." A pressure formed at the base of my throat. I didn't exhale. "She refused to tell us where the man was," Margaret continued. "But she begged to keep the baby safe. I stayed with her through the whole pregnancy, terrified that he would find her again." I felt my pulse in my ears. "And when she gave birth," she whispered, her voice thinning, "you came into the world." I froze. The conservatory, the storm, her trembling hands. Everything went quiet inside me. I swallowed. "I'm Alice's daughter?" She nodded once, slow, defeated. My knees weakened, and I braced myself against the arm of a chair. "What happened to her?" I managed. Margaret looked down at her lap. "She died, a few hours after giving birth. There were complications. She never held you. She only said one thing." I waited. "She said, 'Keep her safe.'" My breath snagged. "She didn't want you anywhere near the man who hurt her," Margaret said. "I knew I couldn't raise you. I wasn't stable then. Not after losing her." Catherine stepped in. She was the only person I trusted. The letter, the secrecy, the tension between her and my mother. It all made a heartbreaking kind of sense. "But why?" My voice cracked. "Why treat me the way you did? Why push me away? Why act as though you despised me?" Her eyes lifted at that, and for the first time, there was no shield in them, only a rawness that startled me. "Elena," she whispered, "every time I looked at you, I saw her, my sister, the girl I failed to protect." Her voice broke completely. "And I hated myself for it. So I pushed you away before you could abandon me like she did. I couldn't speak. The floor might as well have shifted beneath me. Grief wasn't just in her voice. It was holding her together and tearing her apart at the same time. You weren't trying to protect yourself from me, I whispered. You were trying to protect yourself from your memories. She nodded, her lips trembling. I know I hurt you, she said. But I never hated you. I hated the reminder. I hated that I didn't save her. And I hated that I was too afraid to claim you as the last piece of her. My chest tightened painfully. So many years of coldness. So many small cuts disguised as remarks. So many moments I thought I was the problem. It wasn't me. It was grief wearing Margaret's face. Before I could say anything, before I could even process the shape of this revelation, her breath hitched. Her hand clutched the arm of the chair. Margaret? I stepped forward. She shook her head, squeezing her eyes shut as if the weight of everything she'd confessed had finally broken through her restraint. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible. Elena, I'm so sorry. And then she crumpled. The teacup slipped from her shaking hand and shattered against the tiles. Margaret collapsed forward, sobbing into her palms. Not the composed woman who'd spent years mastering control, but someone drowning in the grief she'd kept locked inside. For a moment, I stood frozen. The woman who tormented me, who criticized, withdrew, and wounded me, was grieving my mother. All along, the rain kept pounding overhead, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether to reach for her or step away. I can't breathe in here, I managed to say before I turned away from Margaret, her sobs echoing behind me in the conservatory. The sound chased me, clawed at my chest, but I couldn't stay a moment longer. My legs carried me out of the room, down the hallway, through the front door, and then the cold night swallowed me whole. The rain had eased into a mist, the kind that clung to skin and clothes until it felt like you were wearing the night itself. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked further down the gravel path, the crunch beneath my shoes grounding me more than the air in my lungs could. Every step felt like I was dragging the truth behind me. Alice, my mother, Margaret's sister, a life lost before I ever knew it began. And Margaret, the woman who'd belittled me, dismissed me, brushed past me with a coldness I mistook for contempt. She had been grieving the ghost of my face for decades. I stopped at the edge of the Whitmore garden, near the old oak tree James used to climb as a boy. The branches swayed, shedding droplets of rain like small confessions. I leaned against the trunk, letting my forehead touch the bark. How do you forgive someone? I whispered into the darkness. Who broke you out of their own brokenness? The night offered no answer. Maybe there wasn't one. I closed my eyes, but that didn't help. Every image came rushing back, Margaret collapsing into tears, her voice trembling as she said my mother's name. Her confession, a life full of guilt so heavy it reshaped her. And then the other part, the part that still burned, her remarks that cut deeper than she ever knew, her silence when I needed her support, her disapproval, always present, always sharp, the years of feeling like an intruder in a home where I should have belonged, all because I looked like a woman she lost. My stomach twisted, and I pressed my fist to my mouth to steady myself. Elena? James's voice came from behind me, tentative, careful, as if I were made of glass, and he didn't know where the cracks were. I didn't turn. Elena, he said again, softer this time. Mum told me you left the room. Are you all right? That question, 3 simple words, felt too heavy to carry. I let out a slow breath, watching it fog into the cold air. No, I'm not, I said quietly. Not even close. He stepped closer. I felt his presence before I saw him. What did she say to you? Elena, I've never seen her like that. I turned then, meeting his eyes. He looked shaken, concerned, but still unaware of how deep this went. James, I said, my voice thickening. Your mother. She told me something I wasn't prepared for. He reached for my arm, his touch familiar and warm. I pulled away, not out of anger, but because I felt like I couldn't let anyone touch me without breaking apart completely. Elena, he said gently, talk to me, please. I shook my head. I can't, not right now. He paused, nodding as if trying to understand, even if he didn't. Do you want to go home? He asked. I don't know what I want, I whispered. My breath trembled, and I pressed my hands to my face, trying to regain control. James watched me, helpless in a way that only made me feel more overwhelmed. I stepped back from him slightly. Just give me a minute, I said. He hesitated, then nodded and stayed where he was, giving me space. The garden was silent again. Just me, the oak tree, and the truth I didn't know how to carry. Was forgiveness possible? Did I want it to be? Did I owe it to Margaret or to myself? What happens to James and I now? I didn't have answers, only questions that kept circling like slow-moving storm clouds. And then, my phone rang. I jumped, the sudden sound slicing through the quiet. I fumbled for it in my coat pocket, my hands shaking enough that I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Elena, this is Dr. Hensley from Surrey General. My stomach clenched. Is this about Margaret? I asked, heart pounding. Yes, she's here now. She experienced what appears to be a panic attack brought on by emotional stress. I closed my eyes. Is she all right? She's stable, the doctor said, but she's asking for you specifically. She keeps repeating your name. My breath hitched. Me, of all people. The woman who spent years tearing me down was now lying in a hospital bed, asking for no one but me. Elena? The doctor said when I didn't respond. I swallowed hard, gripping the phone tightly. Yes, I whispered. I'm coming. And as I ended the call, a single thought echoed through me. Whether I was ready or not, I was getting closer to the heart of everything I had spent my life running from. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until I reached the entrance of St. Aldwyn's Hospital and saw my reflection in the glass. It was the kind of trembling that didn't belong to fear alone. It felt like the body remembering something the mind hadn't caught up with yet. The echo of Margaret's voice from the phone call still clung to me. Please, tell Elena to come. I want her. Why me? After everything she'd done, why had she said my name as though it was the only one she could reach for? James walked beside me in silence. He didn't try to take my hand again, and I didn't know whether I was relieved or hurt. Maybe both. The night outside had been cold, but this place had that unmistakable hospital chill. Too clean, too bright, too still. The kind of air that made you aware of your heartbeat. The receptionist told us where she was, and before I had time to fully prepare myself, I was pushing open the door to a small observation room. Margaret sat upright on the bed, clutching the blanket like she was holding onto the edge of a cliff. Her eyes were swollen, not from tears alone, but from something older, an exhaustion that looked stitched into her. When she saw me, her breath hitched. Elena, you came! Her voice sounded like it had walked across a lifetime to reach me. James stepped back, giving us both space. It struck me how strange this moment was. After years of tension, arguments disguised as conversations, and silent battles fought over dinner tables, here she was looking at me like I was the last person left in her world. I moved closer, but kept a careful distance. What happened? I asked quietly. Margaret gave a shaky laugh. Panic. Pure panic. I suppose even people like me break down, don't they? People like me. The phrase lingered in the air. What did she think she was? My adversary? My tormentor? Did she see herself that way? She took a breath, one that wobbled as though she wasn't sure it would hold. I need to tell you something, she whispered. I should have told you years ago. Maybe everything would be different if I had. There it was. That small shift. That promise of something else buried beneath her words. I felt a pull in my chest. A quiet tension that made me wonder what I was about to hear. Why now? Why after all the damage? I sat in the chair beside her bed, the plastic cold through my coat. Margaret turned her head toward the window, as though the darkness outside helped her speak. "Do you remember the first year you married James?" she asked. "Yes." "You remember how I interfered? How I'd find excuses to call him, to drop by, to point out things he didn't need to notice about you?" My jaw tightened, memories tugging at my mind. Her comments disguised as concern, her small intrusions, the way she chipped away at the fragile beginning of our life. "Yes," I said. "I remember." She nodded slowly, almost as if she was bracing herself for the weight of what she was about to reveal. "I sabotaged your marriage," she murmured. "I did it deliberately." The room seemed to shrink. My pulse thudded in my ears. Not because her admission surprised me, I had always suspected, but because of how simply she said it, as though she was confessing to misplacing a letter, not undoing an entire part of my life. "Why?" My voice came out softer than I intended. "Why would you do that?" Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "Because I was frightened. Terrified, actually. I thought I was going to lose James, the way I lost Alice." The name drifted between us like dust unsettled. Alice. She had mentioned her before, but only briefly, always with a tightness around her eyes. I knew she was James's older sister. I knew she'd died young. But I had never understood why the grief behind her name felt so untouched, so sharp. Margaret swallowed. "You remind me of her," she said, voice thinning. "Not in looks. Not in manner. In something else. Something I can't quite name. And when James married you, it felt like watching history repeat itself. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't lose him the way I lost her." Her words caught me off guard. "What happened to Alice?" I asked. Her eyes, gray and fragile, lifted to mine. "She was brilliant, fierce, the kind of girl who'd run headfirst into life even when life was unkind. She was everything." Margaret's breath caught. "And I wasn't kind to her. I was too strict, too cold, too consumed by my own worries. I tried to shape her into someone she wasn't, and by the time I realized how badly I'd hurt her, she was gone." She blinked hard, but not fast enough to hide the tears. "She died thinking I didn't love her." Margaret's voice cracked. "That's what haunts me. That's the part I can't undo." Her hand trembled as she pressed it to her chest, as though trying to steady her heart. "And then James found you, and I saw him smiling the way he used to when Alice was around. And every time you walked into a room, I felt this old fear tightening around me again. I thought—" She paused, searching for air. "I thought if I could control things, I wouldn't lose him too." I expected anger to rise in me, or resentment, something sharp enough to sting, but what I felt instead was a strange heaviness, a recognition of someone who had been stumbling through her own regrets long before I ever entered her world. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, voice dropping to a whisper. "Truly. I'm sorry in a way I can't even put into proper words." There it was, an apology that didn't sound rehearsed or tidy. It sounded like someone digging their way out of rubble. She reached out then, cautiously, as though afraid I'd pull away. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I didn't. Our hands met, hers cold, mine unsteady. The years of tension, hostility, disappointment, they didn't disappear. But in that moment, they softened enough for something else to slip through. "I never wanted to be your enemy," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who had made my life difficult. I saw someone carrying grief like old scars, someone drowning in guilt she'd never spoken aloud. "Margaret," I said quietly, "I don't think you're my villain. I think you're someone who's been hurting for a long time." Her lips trembled. "I wish I could go back," she murmured, "but I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." She released my hand then, letting it fall as though the truth had taken the last of her strength. Before I could respond, before I could decide what forgiveness even meant, her gaze drifted past me, unfocused, almost frightened. "Elena," she whispered, "there's something else I need to tell you." Her voice faltered, and just like that, the room felt thinner, as though something unfinished hovered between us. I stayed in that hospital chair longer than I expected, long after Margaret's final words slipped into the air and left a quiet tension behind. Whatever she meant to tell me, whatever she believed was still waiting between us, remained unspoken. It hovered, delicate and unfinished, like a thread she hadn't dared to pull. When the nurse came in to check her, I stepped back, but Margaret didn't take her eyes off me. There was something in her gaze I hadn't seen before, not fear and not expectation. Something closer to surrender, as though she'd finally stopped fighting a battle she'd been waging alone. I walked into the corridor with that unfinished sentence echoing through me. James stood with his hands in his pockets, his face tight with worry. We didn't speak for a while. It was strange how silence could feel like a question, one neither of us knew how to answer. "Is she all right?" he eventually asked. "She will be," I murmured. "But there's a lot she's carrying." He nodded, but I could see he wanted me to say more, to fill in the pieces, to tell him everything she confessed. I didn't. Somehow it felt like her story wasn't mine to hand over. As we walked towards the car park, a surprising calm settled over me. Not relief, not happiness, something gentler, a quiet acceptance that the past, however painful, didn't have to shape every moment that followed. Forgiveness wasn't a decision I made in one breath. It was something that took root quietly, like the faint warmth after a long winter. And standing there beneath the glow of the streetlights, I realized something important. I wasn't forgiving Margaret because she asked for it. I wasn't forgiving her because she deserved it. I was forgiving her because carrying the weight of anger had become heavier than the hurt itself. Forgiveness didn't wipe away the scars, but it stopped them from bleeding. That was the closest thing to peace I'd felt in a long time. The first attempt at rebuilding anything resembled a negotiation between strangers. A week later, I found myself sitting across from Margaret in her conservatory, surrounded by the scent of old eucalyptus candles and the soft ticking of a mantel clock. She offered me tea the way one would offer a treaty, carefully, as though the smallest misstep might undo everything. We drank quietly, the steam rising between us. Every so often, she cleared her throat, as if she wanted to speak but didn't trust her voice. And I tried to be patient, even when the silence pressed on my nerves. Even when the words that needed saying seemed to retreat into the background. Could two people who had spent years circling each other find steady ground again? Could small gestures replace old wounds? It was awkward, unnatural, but it was something. Weeks later, she called me. Just a short call, nothing structured or expected. She asked how my day was, and I asked about her blood pressure results. There were moments where neither of us knew what to say, where we hesitated, fearful of saying too much or not enough. But we tried. Slowly, carefully. She never rushed the conversation. I never hung up first. Was this how bridges were built? One brick at a time, without ceremony, without applause? I found myself wondering, during those quiet pauses, whether Alice and I would have gotten along, whether she, too, had once tried to navigate Margaret's complicated heart, and whether Margaret's regret had carved more of her life than she ever meant it to. That question stayed with me long after the call ended. The real shift came at a family lunch. It felt like any ordinary Sunday at Whitmore House. Sunlight coming through the tall windows, the faint hum of traffic on Kensington High Street, the clatter of cutlery. I cooked a simple roast, something modest, something I didn't think twice about. When I placed the dish on the table, Margaret studied it with a contemplative look. My chest tightened, bracing for a critique, an assessment, something sharp enough to sting. But instead, she said quietly, "This looks lovely, Elena." Lovely. A word she'd never used for anything I'd ever done. James glanced at me, a flash of surprise crossing his face. Even he didn't hide the small smile tugging at his mouth. During the meal, she took a second helping. She didn't comment on the seasoning. She didn't adjust her napkin with that familiar disapproval. She simply ate, nodded, and said, "You've a good hand with this." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't know how to. But somewhere inside me, something loosened. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It wasn't a miracle. It was just human. And that was enough. The Whitmore garden had been quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that felt like a paused breath. Margaret stood beside me, holding a small potted rose bush, soft pink petals, delicate, almost shy in their bloom. "For Alice," she murmured. There was no dramatic speech, no trembling confession, just a simple gesture that carried more meaning than all her apologies combined. She knelt slowly, careful of her knees, and I helped her lower the plant into the soil. Our hands worked side by side. Her fingers brushed mine once, unintentionally, but she didn't pull away. "Do you think she'd have liked this?" she asked. "I think she'd have loved it," I said, "and I think she'd be glad you planted it." Margaret inhaled shakily, and for a moment, her age showed in a way I'd never noticed before. Not in her posture, but in her history, in the years she had spent trying and failing to love in the only ways she knew. We covered the roots together, pressing the earth gently. When she stood, she leaned on me just slightly, a small trust neither of us acknowledged out loud. As we looked at the rosebush settling into its new place, she whispered, "I hope this is a beginning." "It is," I said. "It's enough for today." She nodded, and the afternoon sun caught her expression. Soft, uncertain, hopeful. And in that quiet British garden, with the faint scent of new roses in the air, I realized something deeply human. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who never learned how to love themselves. I never imagined the final part of my story would unfold on a quiet evening in the Whitmore garden, the same place where Margaret and I had planted Alice's rose. The last of the daylight stretched across the lawn in long, fading strokes, and James stood beside me, hands buried deep in his pockets, as though he feared what might fall out if he opened them. He looked different now. Not older, but weighed down by the kind of truth a person carries for too long. We'd been careful with each other these past weeks, speaking softly, moving slowly, trying to breathe again after everything unraveled. But even in our gentleness, there was a truth we hadn't touched. One that curled around us every time our eyes met. When he finally spoke, his voice felt thin. "Elena, there's something I should have said a long time ago." A quiet coldness settled over me. I knew, not the words, but the shape of them. We walked to the bench beneath the elm tree, his childhood sanctuary, my reluctant witness. I didn't sit until he did. Maybe I already knew I wouldn't stay long. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled sharply. "You remember the day we found out about Alice, about your mother, about the family connection?" My throat tightened. "Yes." He rubbed his palms together, the way he used to before telling me something he feared might hurt. "I didn't learn it that day." Those words hit harder than any revelation before them. My voice came out small. "What do you mean you didn't learn it that day?" He looked away, shame cutting across his expression. "I found out months earlier. Before the wedding." A quiet ringing filled my ears, loud and soft at the same time. I blinked at him, waiting for him to say it was a mistake, or a misunderstanding, or something, anything, that would make it less cruel. You knew? My voice cracked. You knew we were related and still married me? He swallowed hard. Elena, I didn't want to lose you. I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought because the connection was distant. But you decided for both of us, I whispered. You took away my right to choose. He reached for my hand, and I pulled mine back. It took only a second for tears to rise. Not loud ones, not dramatic ones, just the quiet kind that fall when something inside shatters without warning. I covered my face and cried, slow, shaking tears that had been waiting for a place to land. He didn't speak. He just sat there, shoulders small, like he was finally facing the cost of what he'd kept from me. After a long while, I dropped my hands and stared ahead at Alice's rosebush. I trusted you, I said softly. Even when everything else broke, I trusted you. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have told you. I was afraid. I thought love would be enough. Love. The word felt heavy now, stretched thin by everything it had been forced to carry. I straightened slowly, my voice steadier than I expected. James, I can forgive you. I do forgive you. But forgiveness isn't the same as staying. His breath caught, and he shook his head as though hoping I'd take the words back before I finished them. We can't stay married, I said. He blinked up at me, eyes glassy. Elena! I'm not punishing you, I continued gently. I'm choosing peace, for both of us. We can't build a life on something you hid from me. I deserve a truth that doesn't hurt, and you deserve to stop running from yours. A long silence settled between us, soft, sad, final. He bowed his head. If this is what you want, it's what we need. He nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting a sentence he'd already known was coming. But I reached over and took his hand, just for a moment. I'll always care for you, I said. That part doesn't disappear. His thumb brushed my knuckles, trembling. And I you. We sat there until the sky dimmed completely, holding a goodbye that didn't need words. When we finally let go, our hands parted gently. No anger, no shouting, just understanding shaped in the softest ache. We left the bench together. We walked out of the garden separately. Our divorce was quiet, mutual, tender even. Two people releasing each other without blame. Before I stepped inside, I looked back at Alice's rose. It stood there, blooming quietly in the dusk, reminding me that endings don't always come to hurt. Sometimes they come to set things right. Love had brought us together. Truth had broken us open. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, had let us walk away whole. It's been 5 years since that evening in the Whitmore garden. The evening when James and I stood across from one another and silently accepted that love and destiny aren't always aligned. People assume heartbreak happens in one sharp moment, like a door slamming. But in my case, it was more like a photograph, slowly fading, until only the outline remained. I moved to Bath first. It was quiet enough to breathe, but lively enough that I didn't feel like I'd slipped out of the world entirely. I rented a modest flat above a bakery. Every morning, the scent of fresh brioche drifted through the walls like a reminder that life goes on whether you're ready or not. The first year was the hardest. There were days I missed James so much that it felt like trying to breathe through glass. Days when I saw couples on the street and wondered what we might have been if the truth hadn't carved itself between us. Days when I questioned whether we'd made the right decision. But time has a way of teaching you what your heart can't understand in the moment. Margaret and I, we never became best friends, but we grew into something gentler, something that resembled peace. She'd call occasionally, always in the early mornings, when her voice was its softest. Elena, dear, I've been thinking about Alice today. And I would listen. We'd share stories, mine borrowed, hers broken. Sometimes she cried, sometimes I did. She apologized too many times to count, until I finally told her not to say sorry anymore. "You did what grief taught you," I said once, "and I survived it." For the first time, she believed me. When she passed away quietly last winter, James called me himself. His voice cracked only once. "She would have wanted you to know," he said. I drove to Surrey for the funeral, not as a Whitmore, just as someone whose life had been shaped by the woman they were burying. James and I hugged, a long, familiar hug, one that carried 5 years of distance and a lifetime of something softer. "I'm glad you're here," he whispered. Later, after the service, we stood once again in the Whitmore garden, older, steadier, both of us looking at Alice's rosebush. It had grown tall and full, as though it had always known it was planted in memory and not in mourning. "She would have liked this," I said. "She'd have loved that you planted it," he corrected gently. There was no ache between us anymore, just gratitude. Gratitude for what we had once been. Gratitude for what we chose. Gratitude for the quiet truth that some relationships are meant to transform, not endure. James eventually remarried, a kind woman named Charlotte, who laughs with her whole face and brings warmth into every room. I met her once. She hugged me as if she knew our story without needing to hear it. And me? I found peace in ways I didn't expect. I teach part-time now, run a community writing group on Thursdays, and drink far too much Earl Grey. My life is simple, but it's mine, and sometimes that is enough. I walk through the Botanic Gardens in Bath every other weekend. That's where I scatter rose petals, one or two at a time, whenever I feel the weight of the past or the lightness of forgiveness. Because I've learned something. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a practice. A slow, steady choice to stop rehearsing the pain and start living the healing. I still think of James now and then, rarely with sadness, more with a quiet fondness for the chapter we shared and the wisdom it left behind. If life has taught me anything, it is this. Some people arrive to teach us love. Others arrive to teach us truth. And every so often, someone arrives to teach us both, just not in the way we expected. Alice's rose still blooms every spring at the Whitmore estate. James sends me a photo each year, a single rose, bright and alive. A reminder that even the most painful histories can grow something beautiful when given the chance. And perhaps that is all the ending we ever needed.